A distinguished French language and Quebec studies scholar teamed with the Canadian Studies program at SUNY Plattsburgh this summer to develop new curriculums for schools on Franco-American heritage in northern New York and New England. And while in town, Dr. Joseph-Andre Senecal sat down with us to talk about that and the scrutiny that this landmark statue of Samuel Du Champlain has faced over the past couple of years. Historians and community members worked to add this educational panel this summer near the Samuel Du Champlain statue in the city of Plattsburgh. For more than 2 years, a working group consulted Native American leaders, teachers, and Champlain scholars to correct what they saw as several of the statue's historical inaccuracies.
The bronze statue erected in 1912 portrays Champlain in his famous battle gear, proclaims him navigator, discoverer, and colonizer. We learned that Champlain was a discoverer only from the European point of view. Native allies, including the Huron, Algonquin, and Montagnais, who had lived in this valley for more than 11,000 years, had guided Champlain from Quebec to the shores of the lake that now bears his name.
I think that the working group has done a wonderful job in crafting this panel and to identify what precisely is wrong in 2020 with those words that were written over 100 years ago.
Dr. Andre Senecal joins us now, Professor Emeritus at UVM. You taught French and Quebec Studies at UVM for more than 30 years, the director of UVM's Canadian Studies program, and the author of dozens of books, papers, and articles on Samuel Du Champlain, his explorations, the history of Quebec, and Franco-American families that crossed the border and have for several generations now lived in the U.S. Welcome. It is so nice to have you here.
Nice to be here.
You have been visiting SUNY Plattsburgh and the Center for the Study of Canada. Are you working on a project with them?
Yeah, we're working on several projects, but the main project deals with curriculum development for schools, dealing with the French presence in the Champlain Valley, basically. Because so many New Yorkers, especially in this region, have some sort of French-Canadian background.
Your hope is the curriculum that you're developing with SUNY Plattsburgh will focus new attention on preserving
There's very
history.
little material out there now on Franco-American, and there needs to be more because they're among the 10 largest ethnic group in the United States, and very few people are aware of that.
A number of families are very proud of their heritage. Last year in particular, we attended a big family reunion. They have them every year, the Lauren family up in Chazy, New York. And for some, they truly celebrate it. They bring all the descendants together every year, and this is something that they're very proud of, and they continually celebrate this heritage.
Yes, but of course they tend to be the exception. I mean, if we looked at it statistically, unfortunately. But it's good to know that there are people who do that.
Being a scholar of Champlain, I'm curious to get your thoughts on the attention focused in recent months on a statue of Champlain on the waterfront in Plattsburgh. A community group for a couple of years has been debating, discussing whether there should be any changes to the statue. They thought there were a number of...
the statue right here in Plattsburgh.
Right,
yes.
A number of inaccuracies. They put up a panel that explains what they see as some of the errors. Do you think that was a good idea to point out a century later, perhaps some of the...
Sure, absolutely. I think that's a I don't know if everybody would think it's an adequate remedy, but it's a remedy, and it's an opportunity also to tell people exactly how possibly in not in detail, but in the briefest of way, how the statue was conceived, how it was put up. But of course, it's impossible to reconstruct the time of the statue, which is the time when, right after the Great White Fleet and so forth, when America became a world power, and the Great White race was dominant, so to speak. And that will be carried in almost every monument that was erected in those days, whether it's at a roundabout in Washington, D.C., or in the Deep South, or even up here.
And in Champlain's case, I know some people have problems with him being called the discoverer of Lake Champlain and
Right,
having
and
his name
that,
attached
I think,
to the
is
lake.
a question of vocabulary. It perhaps might be better to simply call him an explorer. So to the degree that you can correct a monument made of stone, and I don't remember now whether on the monument this is part of a bronze plaque or whether it's actually
Carved right in, I
carved
think,
right in the
calling
monument.
him the
But even that, I
discoverer.
think, would be possible. It would be a fairly expensive repair, if we want to call it that. That would be a diplomatic word for it.
Right. Do you think that a step like that should be taken, or do you think having a panel that it puts things in context is sufficient?
I think that it's a very good process of reconciliation to simply replace that block of stone or those two blocks of stone and replace one word with another. That would be more acceptable to everybody.
How should we remember Champlain? What kind of a man was he?
Well, we should remember Champlain for a number of reasons. One of them is that he was a great explorer, and he was the first one to work out the system that includes the St. Lawrence, the Great Lake, the Hudson, and Lake Champlain corridor. So that is a great discovery. As great as, I suppose, discovering a whole planetary universe away from ours today type of thing. The maps that he was able to draw were amazing.
And for people who may have an issue with whether he was a discoverer or explorer, is he a man whose accomplishments truly should be celebrated?
I think the word explorer is perfectly fine. It's all a question of what kind of value we associate with the word. And to say that Champlain explored Lake Champlain, to me, seems to be right on the mark, not off the mark. He never claimed to be the discoverer of Lake Champlain. And that's the important thing. The man was humble enough to say that he visited Lake Champlain, and he did that, and he mentions this without equivocation, with the help of allies. Now, the allies were not the Five Nations, but nevertheless, they were Native Americans who knew the importance of the Lake Champlain access.
Early on, the group that looked at the statue said that they didn't want to take it down. They would consider perhaps alterations. They would consider the panel, which is what they ended up adding. Is that the right move, as opposed to those that say that statue should come down?
I don't think I would be a partisan of that solution. I don't think that statue should come down. That statue might be altered. I would be willing to negotiate that if I were part of the negotiation team.
There is a professor from Siena College, Dr. Janet Scheidler, who has been working on a project the past couple of years here in New York State, gathering artifacts and stories of descendants of Franco-Americans who crossed the border to live here and work here in New York and New England. And she is trying to gather all this for an online collection. Is that something that's critically needed to before generations die off, to gather as much of these stories and artifacts that we can from the Franco-Americans who crossed the border?
Absolutely. I think so. Again, because the Franco-American is a very large group, and it's the least documented in America. So anything that can be done right now to salvage this heritage will be enjoyed by future generations. I'm absolutely convinced of that. This is, I think, an important initiative. And a lot of that material is disappearing very, very quickly, very fast.